All right. Good evening, everyone. This is Omar Lyles, the mental health coach, and this is Faith Informed Mental Health. This is Faith Informed Mental Health. Right now, we are in the year 2026. It's been at least a year, well, not a year, a couple of months since I've had actually our first live conversation. And so, new logo, new title, for our particular platform is Faith Informed Mental Health, which is a branch of Faith Informed School of Continuing Education. So this particular podcast platform is basically on faith, mental health. Okay, faith informed mental health, which is an honest global dialogue on trauma, resilience, and pathways to healing through mindful awareness. Okay, and so today we are going to be talking to, all right, Dr. Cassandra Ferguson. She can correct me. All right, and we're going to be talking about trauma without borders, a global conversation on healing with Dr. Cassandra Ferguson. Okay, and this is faith informed mental health. So first of all, I'm so happy and glad that I'm actually speaking with you today. And when I found out about your particular background, but I'm gonna give you the range to actually let everybody know pretty much about our background and not our background, but your background. And so let everybody know, your name, what you do, uh, and what brought you here.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show this evening. My name is Reverend Dr. Cassandra Ferguson, and I am a psychologist. My area of specialty is trauma and addiction. I also am the founder of Diaspora Within Inc., which is a nonprofit organization that houses a few things. It houses my international work, and it also houses the Black Lotus Holistic Health Collective, which is a holistic health center, and it focuses on healing the healer. So it centers those who provide the healing services or the treatment or the medical interventions or otherwise. It centers them in the actual work so that they can center their community. And I'll stop there because I can go on. There's so many things that I'm doing in the world and so many things that I'm doing here where I am based in Philadelphia. But those are the two primary things: the Black Lotus Holistic Health Collective and my psychology practice.
Okay, all right. Well, we're in Philadelphia, around the area that you're at.
So I'm in the Germantown section of Philadelphia. So my
Okay.
holistic health center is actually inside of a park inside of historic town.
Oh,
So the
wow.
property that I'm in was built in 1720. And it's very, very interesting because a lot of the work that I do a lot of nature based work. So I do something called nature based therapy. So I actually take clients out for hikes and we do our therapy in the woods and we use
Hmm.
nature as a co therapist. And then I also do something called hike and sit. So I take folks out for hikes and we create community that way. So we start our hike by, asking like, what are you grateful for? So we start our hikes at 7 a.m. in the morning and we have a group of folks that come out and we take a hike. And during that hike, we're, building community. So we're having conversations. There are times where I'll stop and kind of ask them how whatever is happening in nature, whether it's spring, summer, fall, winter, like how that reflects what's happening in their lives or within them. So it's very interesting. Like where I am located has really been a blessing for the work that I'm doing in the world.
Awesome. So you're doing a lot of nature therapy, and how long you've actually been doing that?
So I started myself and two other Black therapists. We founded nature-based BIPOC nature-based therapy back in 2022.
Mm.
And so I've been doing that work specifically BIPOC nature-based therapy since 2022.
Oh wow. Okay. All right. Wow. Interesting. And being that you do a lot of nature-based therapy, like in the woods and nature and things of that nature, and
Mhm.
it's primarily also you doing like work in urban settings, but is this something global that you're starting to do as well? And and I can see that. So are you doing stuff, from an international perspective, and are you moving into that direction also?
Actually I am, yes. So I've since 2017, I'm actually traveling to Ethiopia on the 20th of this month. So I'll be leaving on the 20th and traveling back to Ethiopia. And this will be my sixth trip to Ethiopia. And I've been doing, yeah, I've been traveling to Ethiopia back and forth since 2017.
Wow.
2017 was my first time traveling to Ethiopia, and we've been traveling back and forth every year. And we choose a different site, but we had one site that we were traveling to. We've traveled to multiple times, which was the Mother Teresa Home of the Sick, Dying, and Destitute. So we would work with people who were terminally ill.
Mm,
There were also expectant mothers. There were, newborn babies. There were children, and others. So there were individuals there who had communicable disease as well as chronic illness, and then, like I said, terminally ill. And we would go to that facility and we would, pray. We would, pray for individuals, and interestingly enough, they would pray for us.
mm,
And we also would provide whatever services they needed. So if they needed support with cooking, with cleaning, with there was a point where we were clipping toenails, we were giving massages, like whatever services or support they needed, we were able to provide that. So we furnished schools as well. So there were classrooms. So we brought items to furnish classrooms, and just a host of things. So my primary function there was, among all the other things, was to destigmatize mental illness and to increase awareness
mm,
and access to culturally responsive mental health treatment. Because there are misconceptions there about mental illness, that it's demonic possession or punishment from God. So there was a lot of shame around mental illness, and there were people who were suffering in silence. And so part of the work that we did was to bring literature in Amharic and teaching them about various different types of mental illness, how it presents, what are the signs and symptoms of it, and then also, suggestions for potential interventions. So they do have mental
mm,
health awareness there, but it's not as widespread as we would have liked it to have been. And especially at this
mm,
particular facility, unfortunately, they didn't have the necessary resources like when someone was in crisis. And so that was something that
mm,
we were able to offer and provide them support with in
mm,
Ethiopia. And so, in answer to your question specifically, yes. In terms of specifically holistic health, right now I'm working with a host of people who are from all over the world, from Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Brazil, Venezuela, and we are working on developing the first of its kind holistic health conference in Ghana. So we are gearing up
mm,
for this. And so part of the holistic health, when we talk about holistic health, specifically African traditional medicine. So we're talking about like, how do we create this understanding, conceptualization of African traditional medicine where it mirrors like other forms of, medicine, like Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, etc., where it can actually be taught, and there's a level of uniformity in terms of it, how it's conceptualized across Africa. So
mm,
that's something that we're doing, and part of it is incorporating nature-based therapy and
mm,
being able to utilize that as a tool in Africa, because it's already
mm,
being done in
yeah,
actuality.
mhm,
Much of what we're talking about is like how to create culturally responsive treatment modalities. And so when we talk about culturally responsive, we're talking about how to utilize what's already being utilized within the cultural context. So they have
mm,
ways that they're currently addressing mental illness
mm,
in Africa. And I've, traveled to India and to Thailand and to Germany
mm,
and Philippines and Kuwait. So they have ways that they're addressing it. But it's like for me, having the perspective that I have here, going there and learning and understanding what that looks like there. So,
Mm,
so yes, the goal is to create what I've created here collaboratively
mm.
within the cultural context and practicing cultural humility.
Awesome, awesome. That's very, very interesting. Uh, One thing that well, I first of all, I just want to say that I'm so jealous because Ethiopia actually is my dream historical place that I always wanted
Ah,
to visit. Besides Jerusalem,
yeah,
Ethiopia is probably,
yes.
matter of fact, one of the professors and colleagues that I know, he'll be teaching in March, in April,
Mm,
and he goes to Ethiopia frequently as well.
really?
Matter of fact, sometimes he takes him and his family, and
Mm-hmm.
they'll visit the Rockview Church. They'll go
Mm-hmm.
to Axum and Lalabella, and I always wanted to see
That's what
the.
I was gonna say, Larry Bella.
Yeah, that's probably one of my favorite places that I ever want to visit. There are a lot of vacation places that I want to see and all that stuff like that, but
Mm,
Ethiopia is my primary number one. Besides, Ethiopia is my.
yeah,
So,
it's
and
gorgeous.
I believe it. I see it. I watch on YouTube all the time when I have my TV
Mhm.
on and I'm looking at all the various places and things of that particular nature. Yeah. So, thinking about talking about international, okay? How do you personally define trauma, especially from an international and a cross-cultural perspectives? Because
Mhm.
the way we view trauma over here and
Mhm.
how it is perceived over there, is there a sort of a stigmatization about it,
Mhm.
for just having any kind of mental health issues? What is your
Mhm.
perspective and how do you define trauma?
Sure. And that's a, in answering the question, it would kind of reference, harken back to what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Like, it's conceptualization cross culturally because it looks
Mhm.
different cross culturally, right? When we talk about trauma, like we know that the how trauma is defined here in the United States, but it's not defined in the same way,
Mhm. Mhm.
cross culturally. And even the word itself isn't used cross culturally. The word trauma isn't used cross
Mhm.
culturally. So
Yeah.
that's also very interesting,
Mhm.
when you talk about it through that lens, like using that specific language, it's not used cross culturally. So one of the things, for me, working within any cultural context is understanding when there is a significant crisis or like, in Ethiopia, for instance, there was a lot of civil unrest. So there was war
Yeah. Mm.
and, kind of understanding what has been the impact is how I have had to frame it. And in Ethiopia, it's really in terms, instead of talking about like mental health, you're more so talking about mindset. That's They're more
Mm.
receptive to
Yeah.
talking about mindset than talking about
Mhm.
mental health or mental
Mhm.
illness.
Mm.
So like language is very important, like how you phrase it, how you frame it is going to be very key in whether or not you're even able to engage in conversation about it. So if you lead with how has your mental health been impacted by it, you may or may not get a response.
Mhm.
But if you talk about, like your mindset around what happened, right?
Mhm.
And how have you shifted your mindset or changed your mindset, you would get more of a response. Now, if, for instance, I was just in Nigeria not too long ago, and again, like talking about like mental health, like and mental illness,
Mhm. Yeah.
cross culturally. So you're talking about like Eastern versus Southern versus Western, right?
Yeah.
Like Western, like West Africa versus South Africa, because I've traveled to South Africa, to East Africa, and to West Africa.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when you look at what I would say in terms of like receptivity to like having this conversation and it being like a robust dialogue around it, I found like when we were talking in specifically in South Africa, that word trauma was used,
Mm.
more so than I found within other cultural contexts. So in West Africa, when I visited the castles, many of the castles where people who were enslaved were taken, we talked, I talked about, I used the word trauma. I talked
Mhm.
about it from the
Mhm.
perspective of trauma.
Mhm.
And, they were talking about the impact, we talked about the implications of it. So I think like that's very important when we're talking about trauma, is to understand if they use the word, and what's the a comparable word for trauma that they use within that particular cultural context, and using that particular language so that you can have a conversation
Mhm.
around it. And I think like that posture of cultural humility is important when you're doing this work abroad, because leaning into that is going to be key, because you're an outsider,
Mhm.
right? And then B, you're having a conversation about subject matter that is, very, for many people, it requires a level of vulnerability,
Mhm.
right? And that's something else that when you look at cross culturally, like there's certain things like in the Philippines, there's so much, that in terms of honor and not bringing dishonor to their families, and
Mhm.
shame to their families. So there's so much secrecy, around certain things, or
Yeah.
the way that it's communicated. And sometimes it can come across as though things are being withheld. But it's like, if you don't understand the cultural context,
Mhm.
you would perceive it in that way, but it's really they're trying not to bring dishonor to their family.
Yeah. I mean,
Which,
being that you present yourself there, um, were they receptive to you?
oh yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. And I think like that's it. Like it's again having that posture of cultural humility, and making sure that you are acknowledging who the gatekeepers are,
Mhm.
and usually it's the elders in the community, or the healers, or the shamans, or the medicine women, the medicine men, the religious leaders,
Yeah.
like understanding within that cultural context who are the people that you have to gain the trust of in
Mhm.
order for you to communicate with the people within the village, or the community, or within the family. So that's key. And having that cultural humility means that you have respect, understanding that you are not the expert, regardless of what
Mhm.
degrees you
Yeah.
come in
Mhm.
with. You are not the expert within their
Mhm.
cultural
I
context.
agree. Mhm.
And so coming in, instead of telling or explaining, asking,
Mhm.
and doing the work to understand, and coming in with a level of curiosity,
Mhm.
and having that level of respect before the cultural context that you're coming into.
Mhm.
So that for me has been very helpful in navigating these various different
Mhm.
cultural contexts that I found myself within.
Mhm. And over the years, you've been, basically from your experience and you working and dealing with those who have mental health, and uh, with your experience and working in the mental health field, what are some early signs that someone may be carrying some sort of unresolved trauma, even if they don't even realize it? Can you just explain and give us your take on that?
Sure. I would say that many times it looks very different. It depends upon the individual. Because most times, like you said, if someone's unaware, especially, then we are creatures of adaptation. We are going to adapt. We're going to figure out a way to overcome. We're going to figure out a way to survive. And sometimes that looks like maladaptive ways of coping, right? Like drugs, like alcohol, like gambling, like whatever it may be, that person, food, there are many ways that people try to cope with
Mhm.
what they're experiencing. Some people are trying to, because they are, in a state of, they're in a dissociative state, or they may be numb, and they're trying to access feelings, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you find people who are drinking, who are using substances because they're trying to access feelings, right? They're trying to access emotions. And there's some people who are feeling too much, and they're, experiencing that state of like hypervigilance. So they're trying to feel less. So
Mhm.
sometimes
Mhm.
they reach for like alcohol and other substances, and the rates of alcoholism and substance use disorders within the population of folks who either have post-traumatic stress disorder, who have experienced, or those who are have experienced a traumatic event,
Mhm.
and those of us who are people of color living in this country who experience ongoing racial trauma, right?
Mm.
So for many people, they attempt to cope, the best way they can. So a lot of times, because my like I said, my areas of specialty are trauma and addiction. So many times within the addictions field, like usually my assumption going in is that that person has experienced one or more big T or little T traumas. And that's why they're sitting in front of me with a substance use disorder. So that's something that I think for me has been one of the clear signs or indicators. When I see someone in front of me that is either, like I said, substance use disorder or some other maladaptive way that they're coping. Another way that I see trauma show up is in the body. And
Mhm.
so I do a lot of somatic work as
Mhm.
well, because we do hold trauma in our bodies. And for
Mhm.
many people, they don't recognize until something activates it,
Yeah. Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so like understanding like from the at the level of the brain and the body,
Mhm.
right? The brain does not distinguish if something is happening right now, if it's a threat, if it's a perceived threat,
Mhm.
if it's a physical threat, if it's an emotional threat, it just knows threat. And so the amygdala, the part of our brain it's called the reptilian part of the brain, but it's the part of the brain that's all about survival, like that
Mhm.
fight, flight, freeze, fall, fawn response. That part of the brain is activated, and then usually you have those particular types of responses. But that part of the brain is activated when there's something that the brain recognizes. So the hippocampus stores emotional responses as well as the memories that are associated with those things.
Mhm.
So if there's something that we're experiencing that's reminiscent of that, so say for instance, if I was um, physically attacked, like assaulted physically, a violent attack by someone wearing an orange hat,
Mhm.
right? Let's just say, for instance. And whenever I would see someone with an orange hat, that would be activating for me, because
Mhm.
that memory of the orange hat and the violence, and then the fear, the shock, of that incident are all what's saved in the hippocampus. And
Mhm.
so when I see that, then that is triggered, and then that part of the brain is activated, the amygdala is
Mhm.
activated. And during that time when the amygdala is active, because that's where your brain is signaling to your body, we got to fight,
Mhm.
we got to run.
Mhm.
And your brain is calculating very quickly, can I take them down? I can't take them down. Okay, I got to run. How do I get out? So when all this is happening, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain where we're making decisions and
Yeah.
rational thought, that's
Mhm.
offline, because it's all about survival. So these things are very key, like when you're talking about signs and you're talking about like recognizing, when someone has experienced trauma or if they may have post-traumatic stress disorder. It's understanding like what it looks like. And, because sometimes, using the clinical jargon is not helpful when you're experiencing it. So it's like, trying to have, I think for me, I think the biggest thing when I'm working with someone is to educate them, like that psychoeducation piece, so that they understand what's happening. And then after you give them that educational piece, then it's being able to give them the experiential. So like when we talk about like mindfulness, like using breath work and using different strategies that help with getting that person from a dysregulated state or activated state back to a state of regulation. So like using your breath and getting the amygdala offline and getting the prefrontal cortex back online. So I gave you, I guess, a
Mhm.
very
Mhm.
comprehensive answer in terms of how do I normally recognize it, and then what is that we address it.
Mhm. Yeah, and you gave a great summary of it. I actually had like 3 or 4 questions, and you rolled it all up into one, so I don't even have to put it out there. Especially
I
when
reviewed
they're
the
getting
questions.
tricky. Yeah, right. So you can speed this
I
up a
made
little
sure I reviewed
faster.
the questions.
Uh-huh. Yes, right. So how do people's faith, right? As far as like faith and how do people wrestle with that? You know, Especially when it comes to when they feel like they don't want to be replacing professional care. Because obviously you are a professional, that's working in the field, how does a person of faith actually have to deal with this? Are they being combative? Do they seem to be really resistant? Or how do you work with them in that kind of spectrum, in that space?
Well, again, I think going through when we talk about that lens of ensuring that it's culturally responsive, I think
Yeah.
that's key because we're not just talking about the cultural context as it relates to like ethnicity. We're also talking about like within various different cultures. And when you think about faith-based communities, there's a very specific culture, that is
Mhm.
inherent in these faith-based community. And one of the things that I'm seeing now, which is definitely giving me a lot of hope within our within the faith-based community, is that there is that people are more open to utilizing resources, mental health resources. And I think that that's key, because one of the things that I noted previously was that there was a lot of stigma still within the Black community and within the Black church. There was a lot of stigma that was associated with mental health and with mental illness. And I find now that people are a lot more open to the idea of mental health interventions. And I actually started a counseling ministry within the place of worship that I attend. And I find that many faith-based organizations are incorporating that within their settings.
Mhm.
And I think one of the primary things when you talk about how do you destigmatize, is by changing the narrative around it, like the language that's being used around it. And I think the
Mhm.
biggest thing is making it culturally responsive. And within the Black community, we have our important dialogue at the beauty salon, the barbershop, in church, on the street corner. Like most of the dialogue around like our mental health and our mental wellness doesn't happen
Mhm.
in an office or
Yeah.
a mental health center or
Mhm.
facility. It happens in social settings, right?
Mhm.
So we are very communal people. We are very, we come from a collectivist societal structure. So we're very communal people, and we talk about things and we work things out within community. And
Mhm.
so that has been a key factor for how I do this work. So, as opposed to utilizing a more traditional or Western lens when I'm working within the faith based community, I use our cultural context,
Yeah.
like how
Mhm.
we heal. So, most of the work that I do is within community. So, it's collective or like group dynamics. And I find that that's really helpful, and it's not structured in the same way as that I would structure a psychotherapy group. It's more conversational.
Mhm.
So we open it and we're having dialogue,
Mhm.
and I ask questions and I make it conversational and also allow for, any good facilitator, the group is really facilitating itself. You
Yeah.
create the parameters for it. And so when you're using this framework of like ensuring that it's culturally responsive, you're identifying like the two different cultural contexts that I'm working with is working within the faith-based community and then working within the community of those of African descent. So
Mhm.
those are two different cultures,
Mhm.
and working within those two cultural contexts together by utilizing strategies that are specific to that cultural context. So I
Mhm.
find that working within that group dynamic is helpful. And I mean, I've done individual work as well, but my approach is going to be different,
Mhm.
in terms of how I'm working with someone of African descent versus someone from Southeast Asia. My approach would be different because I'm dealing with two different cultural contexts.
Mhm.
So, yes, within the faith-based community, I found that there's people are much more open to the idea of it. I've started doing pastoral care for pastors, like being
Mhm.
able to provide that support, around burnout, compassion, fatigue, vicarious trauma, which many of us experience within these leadership roles, and working within the church, providing support resources as chaplains. I'm a
Yeah.
global
Mhm.
chaplain as well,
Yeah.
providing those services. You're always in this posture, right? Like where you're giving. And then like most times we don't emphasize like being able to pour back in and fill back up, right? And so like much of this work is around changing that narrative, right? Like being, I have to just, be in and of service. And it's like understanding, no, that there's also community care and self-care are key, as well. So that's pretty much in answer to your question. I've learned how to create interventions that are culturally responsive, as well as doing the work to change the
Mm,
narrative around our roles, our positions,
mhm,
and us being able to make sure that we're caring for ourselves and caring for ourselves within community.
mhm. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So I'm just going to ask you probably like a good two or three questions, and
Okay.
then yeah. So this question I want to ask you is that okay, what advice would you actually want to like give to caregivers? Especially those who are chaplains, those who are community leaders. Working with traumatized populations. Those who work in various populations. What advice
Mhm.
would you give to them, especially if they're starting out?
Exactly what I just said around self care and community care. That I would say, hands down, is the most important aspect of it. Is ensuring that you have community, ensuring that you have community in terms of support, right? So, say for instance, I'm a chaplain, you're a chaplain, right? Like making sure that I'm checking in on you,
Hmm.
right? That there's that accountability within your community, right? Of chaplains, of leaders, of whomever it is that you're doing this work with, that you have that accountability and that there is community care, because that's what community care is all about,
Hmm.
is accountability, like
Yeah.
ensuring that you're checking in on one another, ensuring that if I see you working 40 hours and you're working a full-time job and you're also working for, like,
Hmm.
hey, like checking in on you, and ensuring that I like we're laying eyes on each other and making sure that we're checking in and we're supporting one another. So having that community, creating community, is so important. Self-care is important. Learning how to establish a way that you're going to make an expenditure but also that you're going to pour back in, being
Hmm.
able to have healthy parameters around the work that you're doing, ensuring that you're understanding, like, okay, do I have the bandwidth to go make 5 calls today, like go to 5 different places and see 5 different people today? Do I have the bandwidth? And if
Mm.
I don't, like being able to schedule like when you can make these expenditures and then how you're going to pour back into yourself, right? How you're going to take care of yourself before you go, while you're there. And that's something that we don't always do. We don't always check in and say, well, how am I doing?
Hmm.
Right. I've gone to 5 hospital. I'm in the hospital. I've gone to 5 different rooms already. Haven't have I taken a break yet? Do I need a break? Do I need to go hydrate or go eat or take a bathroom break or just take a minute to breathe and to get myself centered? Because maybe I might have been in a room where I was pretty activated by what I saw happening in that space, or feeling a little bit drained, right? And being able to just check in with yourself is
Hmm.
key. So, like working with, because I've also been a clinical supervisor as well, and working with individuals. And one of the things that I focus on a lot is ensuring that you have a way of checking in with yourself and making sure that you're okay, and ensuring that whenever you're making an expenditure, you have a way of pouring back in. So that I would say those would be like key things that I would definitely talk to anyone that is new in this field, especially when you're definitely understanding what is vicarious trauma, because
Hmm.
vicarious trauma is like the residue that's left behind when you're
Hmm.
working with individuals who experience trauma. So when you think about, if I've seen 10 people and you think about the residue that's left behind from 10
Hmm.
people,
Yeah.
like really checking in with yourself. And I say that because it gives people a visual, like when you're working with people energetically, there's an exchange that you're making when you're working with people, right?
Hmm.
Because it's a very heavy, dense energy. Like when people
Hmm.
have experienced trauma or they're experiencing grief or whatever it is a very dense, heavy, and you're working with that because you're praying with them, and sometimes you are, there might be other, like, conversation, etc., and you might be consoling them. So energetically, it's an expenditure that you're making, and many times we don't think about it in that way, right? Like when you fill your car up with gas, you fill your car up with gas for the trips that you're going to have to take for that week, right? And like when your car's running low on gas, you got to fill the tank up. And we don't always think like that when we're thinking about ourselves. Like that, I have to fill back up because I just went into 5 different hospital rooms. Or I went and did 5 different house calls, or I met with 5 or 6 different people. And I have to fill back up before I can make another expenditure. And most times we don't do that until we're on E, or we're running on fumes.
Right.
Right. And then it's like we don't always think about, like, when we're like that, can I give my best? Am I at my best for myself, for my family? Right. So what do I have left after I've done all of this?
Yes.
Right. And so it's interesting when you look at, those of us who do this work, and you look at the rates of like various different illnesses, right? And like, various different, other ailments, etc. And then like for some, it's, you look at like the rates of other ailments that people experience because they're trying to cope. So sometimes people use food, or they might use caffeine or sugary things because they're fatigued, they're tired, and they're trying to fill up so that they can have the energetic resource, but not necessarily have an actual energetic resource. So I think like those are things that are very important, like identifying if whether or not you have the bandwidth, taking care of yourself before, during, and after, creating community around yourself to ensure that you have those resources, and that you have someone that's laying eyes on you, that's checking in on you, that's holding you accountable to take care of yourself. And remembering that every person that you're working with, there is that vicarious trauma or that residue that's being left behind when you're working with people. So making sure that you have a plan for when you're working before, during, and after, when you're working with people who have experienced trauma.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And this is actually very informative. And I hope that those in the audience who are watching have taken in some of the information pretty much that was discussed here tonight. So, and before we go, well, I can say this. You can stay on a couple of seconds even after we go, after we get off. But let everybody know where they can actually find you, any social media accounts, websites, or whatever like that.
Oh, sure. So our website is blacklotushhc.org. So that's our website. And on Instagram, we're blacklotus.hhc. And on Facebook, Diaspora Within is our Facebook page. And we do also have a Black Lotus page, but I post more on the Diaspora Within because Diaspora Within is a nonprofit, and that's where the initiative, the Black Lotus, falls underneath. And if you ever wanted to book me for speaking engagements, or for global consulting work, or for psychotherapy, you can email me at Dr. Cassandra R. Ferguson at gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for actually coming on. So you're my first guest, as I was saying earlier, for the year 2026, because I haven't been doing it in a while. So everyone out there, you'll see more of Omar, the mental health coach. Actually, this live is actually not on the Faith Informed Mental Health um, uh, Facebook page, because I had actually created a different page, which is actually for this particular platform, Faith and Forth Mental Health. So, so I have it, posted live on Omar Lyles, the mental health coach. So, but thank for those who will be watching, and for those that are actually watching, I hope that this was informative. And so, stay on for a couple of seconds. And so,
Okay.
everyone else, we thank you for just tuning in, and stay tuned. Okay. All right. God bless, and have a
Bye, guys.
wonderful evening.